Waitress pays for crying teen's meal from her tips, unaware his father was watching from afar. The simple act of kindness hung in the air of the small diner like the scent of fresh coffee, unassuming yet powerful enough to change lives. Mia Wilson hadn't planned on giving away her hard-earned tips that evening, but something about the boy's silent tears falling onto his untouched pancakes had cracked open a place in her heart she thought long sealed. The fluorescent lights of Eddie's 24-hour diner buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floor. It was the kind of place where the coffee was always fresh but never good, where the vinyl booths had cracked from years of weary bodies seeking momentary refuge. For Mia, it was both workplace and sanctuary, the only constant in a life that had taught her to expect disappointment. Her fingers absently traced the small scar on her wrist as she watched the teen from behind the counter. He couldn't be more than 16, shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight, dark circles framing eyes that seemed to have forgotten how to hope. His hoodie, too thin for the bitter December chill, hung from his frame like a surrender flag. Mia recognized that look. She'd worn it herself once, back when her world had collapsed beneath her feet at exactly his age. "You okay there, hun?" She approached his booth, coffee pot in hand, though he'd ordered water. A pretense to check on him without being obvious. The boy quickly wiped his eyes with his sleeve, embarrassment coloring his pale cheeks. "I'm fine." His voice cracked on the second word. Mia nodded, not believing him for a second, but respecting the lie. Teenagers needed their dignity. She'd needed hers once, too. "Let me know if you want to order something." She turned to leave, giving him space. "Actually," his voice was so soft she almost missed it. "Could I see a menu?" Mia handed him the laminated sheet, noting how his hands trembled slightly. She'd been a waitress long enough, 11 years at 3 different diners, to recognize when someone was counting pennies in their head, wondering if they had enough. "The breakfast special's good," she offered casually. "Comes with coffee, too." He studied the menu too intensely, shoulders tense. "Just the pancakes, please." She scribbled the order down, not mentioning that the breakfast special was actually cheaper. Pride was sometimes the only possession people had left. She'd honor his. 3 hours into her double shift, her feet already screaming in protest, Mia delivered the stack of pancakes to his table. She set down extra butter and syrup without being asked, along with a side of bacon she wouldn't charge for. Small mercies were sometimes all she could offer in this world. "Thank you," he murmured, not meeting her eyes. She busied herself with other customers, the midnight truckers, the insomniacs, the lonely hearts seeking human connection over cheap coffee. But her eyes kept drifting back to the boy. He hadn't touched his food. Instead, he stared at it while silent tears tracked down his face, falling onto the untouched plate. Something inside her chest tightened. She'd seen hardship before. You couldn't work graveyard shifts in a diner without witnessing humanity at its most vulnerable. But something about this kid struck a chord. Maybe it was the careful way he'd folded his napkin, or how he'd said please and thank you with such quiet dignity. Or maybe it was because he reminded her of someone she once knew, someone she couldn't save. 20 minutes later, the boy called her over, voice thick with shame. I'm sorry. I don't think I can pay for this." Mia looked at the untouched pancakes, now cold. "Is something wrong with the food?" No. He shook his head quickly. "It looks great. His hands disappeared into his pockets, emerging empty. "I thought I had more money. I'm really sorry for wasting your time." The defeat in his voice made something in Mia's chest crack open. Decisions were rarely made in grand moments. They happened in small spaces between heartbeats. Between one breath and the next, she made hers. "It's on the house," she said, keeping her voice matter-of-fact, not wanting to embarrass him further. His head jerked up, eyes wide with disbelief. "What? Don't worry about it." She smiled, picking up the plate. "Let me get you a fresh one. These are cold now." "But, kid, I've had enough pancakes in my lifetime to feed a small country. Trust me when I say these ones aren't worth crying over." She offered a small wink, relieved when the corner of his mouth twitched upward slightly. In the kitchen, she quickly placed a new order, ignoring Eddie's raised eyebrow. The owner had a strict policy about freebies, namely that there weren't any. Mia slipped $15 from her tip jar into the register when Eddie wasn't looking. It was nearly half of what she'd made tonight, money that was supposed to go toward her electricity bill. Some things were more important than keeping the lights on. When she returned with fresh pancakes, something had shifted in the boy's demeanor. He still looked exhausted, but the crushing despair had lifted slightly. "Thank you," he said, and this time he met her eyes. His were startlingly blue, intelligent eyes, kind eyes, despite the sadness that clouded them. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll eat while they're hot," Mia replied lightly. "And maybe tell me your name." "Jason," he said, picking up his fork. "I'm Jason." "Nice to meet you, Jason." "I'm Mia." She didn't hover, giving him privacy to eat, but she noticed he took small, deliberate bites, as if savoring each mouthful. When had he last eaten? The question gnawed at her as she refilled coffee cups and rang up checks. What Mia didn't notice was the man sitting in the far corner booth, partially hidden by the day's newspaper. He'd arrived shortly after Jason, ordered only coffee, and had been nursing the same cup for over an hour. His weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes, the same startling blue as Jason's, missed nothing. Robert Callahan had followed his son at a distance, an act born of desperation rather than intrusion. 2 months since the accident, 2 months since their family had fractured beyond recognition. 2 months of Jason barely speaking, of nightmares that sent him wandering from the house at all hours. Tonight, Robert had awakened to find Jason's bed empty again and made the split-second decision to follow rather than search blindly. Now, watching this waitress, this stranger, show his son more compassion than he'd been able to muster lately, something inside Robert's chest both ached and warmed. As the night deepened, the diner emptied until only Jason, Robert, and a couple of truckers remained. Mia brought Jason a cup of hot chocolate he hadn't ordered, setting it down with a gentle smile. "On the house," she said before he could protest. "It's cold out there." Jason wrapped his hands around the mug, seeking warmth. "Why are you being so nice to me?" Mia paused, considering her answer carefully. "Because someone was nice to me once when I needed it most." She glanced at the clock. "My shift ends soon. Do you need me to call someone for you?" "It's late for you to be out alone." Jason stared into his cocoa. "No one to call?" The simple statement held volumes of pain. Mia recognized the hollow ring of truth in it. She'd said those exact words herself, standing in the rain outside a different diner, 17 years old and nowhere to go. "You sure about that?" she asked softly. Jason's jaw tightened. "My dad, we don't really talk anymore." "Huh." Mia leaned against the booth. "My mom and I didn't talk for 8 years. Now we have Sunday dinner every week." His eyes flickered with interest. "What happened?" "Life. Death. Forgiveness." She shrugged. "The usual melodrama." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Sounds complicated." "Most important things are..." She straightened, adjusting her apron. "Listen, I get off in 15 minutes. If you need a ride somewhere, I should go." Jason stood abruptly, leaving the hot chocolate half-finished. "Thank you. For everything." Panic flashed briefly across his face like he'd said too much. Before Mia could respond, he was heading for the door, shoulders hunched against the cold night waiting outside. "Wait!" she called after him. "At least take this." She grabbed her own scarf, blue wool, worn but warm, and held it out to him. Jason hesitated, hand on the door. "I can't take your scarf." "Sure you can. Blue suits you better than me anyway." She stepped closer, noting how he flinched slightly at her approach. Not fear, she thought. Shame. "It's just a scarf, Jason. Sometimes it's okay to accept help." Their eyes met in a moment of perfect understanding. Two souls who knew what it meant to stand alone against the world. Slowly, he reached out and took the scarf, wrapping it around his neck. "Thank you, Mia." His voice held the weight of gratitude for more than just warm wool. Then he was gone, the bell above the door jingling in his wake. Mia stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty doorway. She hadn't saved him. One meal and a scarf couldn't fix whatever had broken in that boy's life. But maybe, just maybe, she'd reminded him that kindness still existed in the world. Sometimes that was enough to keep going for one more day. She turned back to clear his table and jumped slightly. The man from the corner booth stood there, newspaper tucked under his arm, eyes, so similar to Jason's, fixed on her face. "Was there something else you needed, sir?" she asked, professional smile sliding back into place. Robert Callahan had rehearsed what he might say in this moment, but standing before this woman who had shown such simple, profound compassion to his son, words failed him. Instead, he reached into his wallet and pulled out 5 $20 bills. "This doesn't begin to cover what you did," he said, voice rough with emotion. "But I'd like you to have it." Mia stared at the money, confusion creasing her brow. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "Jason," Robert said simply. "He's my son." Understanding dawned on her face, followed quickly by wariness. You were watching him? Following him. Robert's shoulders sagged. We lost his mother 2 months ago. Car accident. He was in the passenger seat. Walked away without a scratch while His voice broke. Mia's expression softened. I'm so sorry. He blames himself. I've tried to tell him it wasn't his fault, that black ice doesn't discriminate, but… Robert ran a hand over his face. Tonight I found his bed empty again. I followed him here because I was worried. Then I saw how he was with you, and I couldn't… Interrupt! Mia finished for him. I understand. Robert nodded, gratitude in his eyes. What you did for him? He gestured to the money still in his hand. Please take it. Mia glanced at the bills, then back to his face. Keep your money, Mr. Callahan. Robert. Mr. Callahan. Her voice was gentle but firm. I didn't help your son for money. I know that, he said quickly. That's precisely why I want you to have it. A small smile touched her lips. What I want is to know that Jason's okay. That's payment enough. Robert studied her for a long moment, seeing the genuine concern in her eyes. Slowly, he returned the money to his wallet. He hasn't been okay for a while, he admitted. Neither of us has. Mia's gaze drifted to the window, where snow had begun to fall in large, lazy flakes. Loss has a way of freezing us in place, she said softly. Makes us forget how to move forward. You sound like you know something about that. She met his eyes again. Enough to recognize it in others. Something shifted in the air between them, a recognition of shared experience that needed no elaboration. Robert cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how long he'd been standing there. I should go after him. Mia nodded. You should. She hesitated, then added, He's wearing my blue scarf. Should be easy to spot. Thank you. The words were inadequate, but Robert infused them with all the gratitude he couldn't articulate. As he turned to leave, Mia called after him. Mr. Callahan? He paused, looking back. Sometimes the hardest words to say are the simplest ones. Her eyes held a gentle knowing. I miss her too might be a good place to start. Robert's breath caught. How had this stranger seen so clearly what he'd been unable to? He nodded once, the motion jerky but sincere, then pushed through the door into the snowy night. Mia watched until his figure disappeared, then returned to her closing duties, mind still on the boy with sad eyes and his grieving father. Some connections stayed with you, brief though they might be. She had a feeling this was one of them. The next evening, Mia arrived for her shift to find a small package waiting for her behind the counter. Inside was a blue scarf. Her blue scarf, carefully washed and folded, along with a note in neat, precise handwriting. Thank you for your kindness. Sometimes the smallest light shines brightest in the darkest night. J&R Callahan. Beneath the note was a gift card to the bookstore downtown for exactly the amount she'd spent on Jason's meal, plus the exact cost of the breakfast special. Mia smiled, tucking the card into her pocket. They must have called to ask about the prices. She wrapped the scarf around her neck, its familiar warmth somehow different now, imbued with the beginning of a story she hadn't expected to be part of. As she turned to greet her first customer, Mia wondered if she would ever see Jason or his father again. She didn't have to wonder long. 3 days later, as her shift was ending, the bell above the door chimed. Jason walked in, shoulders straighter than before, his father close behind him. They sat in Mia's section, and though grief still shadowed their eyes, something else was there too, a fragile, newborn hope. Hey, Jason said with a tentative smile. We were wondering if you had time for some pancakes. Our treat this time. Mia looked between them, noting how Robert's hand rested lightly on his son's shoulder, not quite comfortable yet, but trying. A beginning. She untied her apron and slid into the booth across from them. I think I can make time for that. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the world in soft white possibility. Inside, over plates of pancakes and mugs of hot chocolate, 3 broken people began the slow, beautiful work of healing. One word, one smile, one moment of connection at a time. Sometimes the universe orchestrated second chances in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes redemption arrived with pancakes and a blue scarf. And sometimes the most profound transformations began with the simplest acts of kindness. A waitress paying for a crying teen's meal from her tips, unaware his father was watching from afar. 2 months later, Mia's tiny apartment was filled with the unfamiliar sound of laughter. Jason sat cross-legged on her second-hand couch, recounting his debate team victory with animated hands, while Robert added proud commentary from the kitchen where he was plating the lasagna he'd insisted on bringing. These Sunday dinners had become a ritual of sorts, an anchor in all their lives. What had begun as gratitude had evolved into friendship, and then, almost without them noticing, into something like family. "You should have seen him, Mia," Robert called from the kitchen. Took down their entire argument with 2 sentences. Jason rolled his eyes, but his smile was genuine. "Dad's exaggerating. It was at least 4 sentences. Mia laughed, setting glasses on her small dining table. "Either way, I'm impressed. Debate was never my thing. Too confrontational." "Says the woman who faced down my principal last week," Jason countered. "That wasn't confrontation," Mia corrected primly. "That was advocacy." The memory brought proud smiles to all their faces. When Jason's grades had slipped and the school had been quick to label him a problem rather than recognize his grief, Mia had accompanied Robert to the parent-teacher conference. Her calm, unflinching insistence that Jason needed support, not punishment, had changed the entire conversation. "Advocacy looks a lot like confrontation when you're doing it right," Robert said, bringing the steaming lasagna to the table. His eyes met Mia's with warmth that had been growing steadier with each passing week. Dinner passed with comfortable conversation, punctuated by moments of remembering. They spoke of Jason's mother now, Catherine, with a mixture of sadness and celebration that felt like healing. Her name no longer hung unspoken between father and son. "Mom would have liked you," Jason told Mia as they cleared the dishes. "She collected people too." Mia raised an eyebrow. "Collected people?" "People who needed someone in their corner," he explained. "Like you do." The simple observation caught her off guard. She'd never thought of herself that way, but looking back at her life, the strays she'd taken in, the co-workers she'd defended, the neighbors she checked on, perhaps he was right. "Your mom sounds like she was an amazing woman," Mia said softly. "She was." Robert joined them, dish towel in hand. "And she would have been the first to tell me I was being an idiot, withdrawing when Jason needed me most." Jason leaned against his father's shoulder briefly, a casual affection that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. "We were both pretty messed up." "Still are," Robert admitted. "Just working on it now." Mia watched them, this father and son slowly rebuilding their relationship from the ashes of shared loss. They still had hard days, Jason still had nightmares, Robert still fell into periods of quiet grief, but they were learning to navigate those waters together. Later, as Robert drove her home after their traditional post-dinner walk, snow began to fall again. Large flakes danced in the headlights, creating a tunnel of swirling white. "Careful," Mia said automatically, tension creeping into her voice. "Roads might get slick." Robert's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but his voice remained steady. "I've got snow tires now, and we're going slow," she nodded, forcing herself to relax. They were both still learning to manage the anxiety that snow and icy roads triggered. For her, memories of her own family's accident years ago. For him, the fresh wound of Catherine's death. "Jason's looking at colleges," Robert said after a comfortable silence. "State University has a good debate program." "That's wonderful," Mia said sincerely. "He'd be amazing at it." "It's only 40 minutes away." Robert glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "Close enough to come home on weekends if he wants. Far enough to feel independent." "Perfect distance," she agreed. Another pause, this one holding a different kind of tension. "Mia," Robert began, then seemed to reconsider his words. "These past few months have been unexpected," she finished when he trailed off. A small smile touched his lips. "That's one word for it." They pulled up outside her apartment building, but neither made a move to end the conversation. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Robert said finally, his voice low and honest. "After Catherine died, I was certain that part of my life was over, that I'd just exist for Jason's sake." Mia's heart beat a little faster. "And now?" He turned to face her, snowflakes melting on his dark hair. "Now I find myself looking forward to things again, making plans, wondering..." He took a deep breath. "Wondering if you might want to be part of those plans." The vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. They'd been dancing around this growing connection for weeks, neither wanting to be the first to acknowledge it. "Robert," she said gently, "I'm not trying to replace Catherine." "I know that." His voice was firm. "No one could. But that doesn't mean there isn't room for something new, something different but equally valuable." Mia thought about the winding path that had led her here, from a lonely woman working double shifts to make ends meet, to this moment, being offered a future she hadn't dared imagine. "I'd like that," she said softly, "being part of those plans." The smile that spread across his face made him look years younger. He reached across the console and took her hand, his touch warm and certain. Jason's going to say he called it, he warned with a soft laugh. Mia smiled. He's an observant kid. He gets that from his mother, Robert said, and for the first time the mention of Catherine held more fondness than pain. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering old tracks and creating a clean slate. Inside the car, two people who had found each other through an act of kindness looked toward the future with cautious hope. 6 months after that snowy night in the diner, Mia stood in Eddie's 24-hour diner in a simple blue dress, surrounded by a small gathering of friends and chosen family. Her mother sat in the front booth, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Eddie himself had closed the diner for the evening, a first in its 30-year history, and now beamed proudly from behind the counter. Jason, handsome in a suit and looking far older than his 17 years, checked his watch and gave her a reassuring nod. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. Mia took a deep breath, smoothing down her dress. "Ready?" The small portable speaker began playing a soft melody, and all eyes turned to watch as Jason walked Mia down the narrow aisle between the diner booths toward where Robert waited by the window where it had all begun. Their wedding was as unconventional as their love story. Vows exchanged in a diner, pancakes instead of wedding cake, a teenage best man who was soon to be a stepson. Yet as Mia looked into Robert's eyes and promised to build a future with him, she couldn't imagine a more perfect ceremony. "When you paid for a crying teen's meal," Robert said in his vows, voice thick with emotion, "you had no idea his father was watching. You had no idea you were saving not just one life that night, but two." Tears spilled down Mia's cheeks as she squeezed his hands. "And you had no idea that by coming back, by bringing Jason back, you were saving mine too." They sealed their promises with a kiss as their small gathering erupted in applause. Jason was the loudest of all, his young face alight with joy untainted by the shadows that had once consumed him. Later, as they shared their first dance between the diner booths, Robert pulled Mia close. "Catherine would be happy," he murmured against her hair, "knowing Jason and I found our way back to life." Mia leaned back to meet his gaze. "I think she sent me to that diner shift for a reason." Robert smiled. "I'm starting to believe that too." Across the room, Jason stood talking with Mia's mother, his gestures animated as he described his upcoming freshman year at State University. He caught Mia's eye and gave her a thumbs up, his smile bright and genuine. In that moment, surrounded by the unlikely family they'd created, Mia marveled at how life's greatest transformations often began with the smallest acts of kindness. One meal paid for from meager tips, one scarf given freely on a cold night, one moment of compassion that had rippled outward, changing everything in its wake. As Robert twirled her beneath the diner's fluorescent lights, Mia sent a silent thanks to whatever force had brought them together. Fate, coincidence, or perhaps the gentle guiding hand of a woman who had loved these two men first. Sometimes the most beautiful journeys began in the most ordinary places. Sometimes healing came wrapped in unexpected packages. And sometimes, a second chance at happiness started with nothing more than a waitress who paid for a crying teen's meal from her tips, unaware his father was watching from afar.